Hey, my name is Joel, and this is my free drum set. What do I mean by free? Well, I mean they're free. I actually made money and got these drums, so I'm really kind of in the black on it. I've actually made some money, and I still have these drums. Now, a free drum set is not particularly exciting because you could probably answer ads on Craigslist quite often and just go pick up basically free or next to free drums. But these, unlike probably most free drums, are drums I actually enjoy. I play them, I record them, I use them. Some of the items I've had for a long time, and some of it I've acquired a little bit more recently. But I just wanted to share with you kind of a show and tell of a drum kit that I enjoy. I enjoy because I enjoy them. I also enjoy because they didn't cost me anything when all was said and done. So these black drums are Yamaha 7000 series drums made in Taiwan. They're from the Taiwan era of production for Yamaha drums, about 1979 or 1980. They made two lines of drums, the 9000 series, which are all birch shells, and the 7000 series, which were Luan or Philippine mahogany shells with an inner ply of camellia. Now, camellia is not a wood I was familiar with. I am familiar with Luan. Camellia, I had to look that up. Not a lot of information other than it is a hardwood, comes from a flowering tree, and apparently the flowers are quite popular in Japan, and they are very pretty. And the wood itself is often used to make Japanese bokken, which is a practice samurai sword, basically. Beyond that, I couldn't find much information, Janka hardness, all the stuff that I talked about in the video last week. But I can say it's a beautiful looking wood. It is a tight grain. Seems to be fairly hard. Now, why are these drums free? Because I got them originally as part of a 14 drum lot of drums that I bought off of Craigslist for $225. And it had like a vintage Slingerland bass drum and marching snare and a Yamaha marching snare and a vintage Pearl steel snare drum, a President series, like late 60s, early 70s. Ludwig Rocker bass drum, Pearl Export bass drum and toms, a bunch of orphan drums. And then these four, which obviously came together. So I sold all the other stuff and came out about $400 over what I paid for them. So I was in the black $400 profit. And I still had these four drums. Now, there was no tom mount, there were no spurs, there were no floor tom legs, just the drums, and the heads were beat to heck. And the finish is pretty roughed up too, and in fact, every drum actually has engraved in the finish NGHS 75042, which is North Garland High School, and the zip code 75042. Now, I don't live in Garland, but apparently, these were North Garland High School drums, I guess, in the 80s. So if you went to North Garland High School in the 80s and were involved in the band program, these were the drums that were being played. So there you go. And now they're mine. But I got them from a fellow who bought a lot more drums, including all the ones that I got from him, from the Garland School District. So he kind of went to a big garage sale type thing, bought a whole bunch of stuff, kept some, and then sold all those to me. I sold what I sold, and I kept these. But I got to tell you, as a kid, I was familiar with these drums. I had the catalog, I had the actual catalog that these drums are featured in. From the Taiwan era, they made two lines, the 9000, the 7000, and that was it. And these were the lower line drums, but I gotta say the build quality is exceptional. I'm shocked the interior is finished, which is not true of entry-level drums now. The bearing edges are well sanded, super smooth and lacquered. They tune fabulously. While the finish might be beat up and scratched, the edges are great. And so I put new heads on it, and I just was floored how good they sounded. By the way, the bass drum had metal hoops, and they were kind of banged up and rusted. So I actually had these hoops from, I think, a Pacific kit or something like that, some wood lacquered hoops. And so I put them on. Probably deserves to be refinished, so it looks a little better later. But anyway, the heads I put on these, on the back I put an Aquarian Super Kick 1, which is the single ply version. On the front I put a regulator ported bass drum resonant head. The tops are Aquarian Studio X, which are single ply heads, and they have a little ring, muffling ring on the bottom. This black ring on the top is just printed. It's part of the silk screening. It's not actually really affecting the tone much at all. And classic clears on the bottom. And the drums tune super well. They sound amazingly good. To round out the kit or to make them usable, I had to find a tom holder, which didn't come with them. Found this for $50. So that set me back 50, meaning I'm profiting $350 at that point. And for the bass drum spurs, I had some Tama Rockstar spurs already that I got off a kit that I parted out couple years back, and they actually were the right spacing and size for it. The Yamaha spurs are unobtainable now. So I put the Thomas spurs on it and had to drill the shell for that, but it covered the old holes, so it looks good. And then the floor tom brackets here and legs are just things that I also had, and they actually fit the hole pattern of the brackets on the drum, so I didn't have to drill it. I could just mount them. And so here it is. These toms and bass drums sound awesome. And one quick thing, these drums are really heavy, and if you know me by now, you know I really like heavy drums. So heavy, in fact, that the bass drum, even though it's a 14x22, and behind me I have a 14x24 Ludwig heavy 6-ply late 70s bass drum, which is my favorite, love that. This is actually heavier than that. It is an incredibly heavy drum. The shells are really, really thick. Again, this is back when drum shells were really thick, and I just really like that. Really strong fundamental, they sound great. Check them out. So the next drum I'm going to show you is the snare drum on this kit. I'd love to be able to tell you what it is, but I honestly don't know because there's no badge on the thing. There's no brand or logo on it anywhere. It is obviously an 8-lug steel shelled drum of Asian origin, either Japan or Taiwan. I would say probably from the 70s. These you can see that look pretty much just like this. The same kind of shell are made in China. Pretty commonly. I have not cleaned this thing at all. I simply put new heads on it and new wires, but I have not cleaned it at all, obviously. When I got it, it actually came with a Ludwig kit that was really beat up, just really abused, and I just took the hardware off it to use for another project, and then I actually sold all of the leftover bits of hardware and stuff and made like 75 bucks in the deal. So again, I'm kind of profiting off of the thing. And I had this drum, which I was going to throw away. It actually has the nastiest head on it that I think I've ever seen. It was a coated Evans head that had just been beat to death, had almost no coating left on it, it's completely caved in, and had 2 blocks of styrofoam taped to the underside of the head. And so it was just weird. I thought, well, I'm going to play that just for fun and see what it sounds like. So I did, just the way I got it, and it actually sounded kind of interesting, so much so that I kept the head, so I can actually show you the head, and kind of filed away the idea of using styrofoam blocks on the drum head. I haven't done it yet, but it actually was kind of a cool, sort of funky, loopy sound. So I thought that was interesting, and the drum was round, and so I thought, well, what about new heads? So I put new heads on it, and I love the way this drum sounds. I can't say that it's a refined sound, but it is definitely a very solid backbeat with a really great tonality. And interestingly enough, also, this drum, you can't see any vent on it anywhere. Look at that. No vent on this bad boy. I thought surely it's not without a vent. Well, it is not without a vent because I tipped it over and I found the vent. It's underneath the snare butt, so you don't see it, which I thought was kind of cool. You don't put a grommet on it, you don't put a badge on it, you just hide it. So, never seen that before. When I got it also, this was frozen in that position. It wouldn't go fully on or fully off. I worked it loose with some WD-40. It still works, so I left it on the drum. I'm thinking one of these days I will clean it and rebuild it, maybe do some stuff with it, but it's just so cool, I haven't bothered doing it. So it's a great sounding drum. Check that out. next thing I'm going to talk about is this
China
cymbal over here that has been beat to death. Look at that edge. That edge is really, really damaged. I got this thing for free. It was given to me, so this is truly just free. I actually was driving and I looked over and saw a store I had never noticed before. In an intersection I'd passed many, many times, you know, outdoor shopping area, and I didn't spend a lot of time in the area, but I've been past it many times. And there was a sign said B&C Music Company. And I thought, music company? I wonder if they have instruments. So I had time and I popped in. And there was an old fella in there, and they did indeed have drums and things like that. And so I just got to talking to him. He was the proprietor. His last name was Klein, C-L-I-N-E. And turns out that he actually ran a store called Klein Music Company in Richardson, Texas, downtown old Richardson, that when I was a child, I would beg anyone who could drive to take me to Klein Music so I could look at drums, because I loved drums and couldn't drive. But turns out he's the fella who actually owned and ran that store. So it was interesting to meet him, and we talked about that, and it was really cool. But while we were talking, I saw this thing sitting on a shelf or something, and I was like, man, what happened to that? I remember him saying something like, a really good customer of mine took that and was using it, and then he returned it. I remember thinking, he returned it? Like he took it new and returned it like that? And I was just like, wow, he really beat the snot out of it. And then I hit it.
China.
And it sounded amazing to me. And I actually was like, it sounds really cool. And he said, do you want it? So he gave it to me. And I have recorded this thing so many times. I have noticed recently there are 2 cracks. I can feel one right there. And there's another one fairly close to it, I think. Yeah, well, anyway, there's another one on there somewhere. And I probably need to actually file those out so that they don't spread, because I love this cymbal.
China!
And so I'll play it for you, and you can see why it is that I love it. The next thing I'm going to talk about is this ride cymbal. This brass 20-inch Japanese ride cymbal. I don't know what brand it is. I got it from John Zhu from Dallas Drum. He bought it and another very much like it for 30 bucks total at a pawn shop here locally many years ago. And they were both really intriguing sounding, and I thought, yeah, that's worth 30 bucks. So I gave him his 30 bucks back, and he got a free cymbal basically. And I spent 30 bucks. So let's see, I profited $350 off the Yamaha drums, and I profited $75 off the Ludwig kit that I got this snare drum from. So what is that? $350 and $75 is $425. So I'm up $425, and I paid $30 for this. So that brings me down to what, $395? Yeah, it took me a while to get through that, but there you go, $395. So that basically means that I'm $395 up still total, and now I have the Yamaha drums, the snare drum, and this fine Japanese ride cymbal. Now, I call it a Japanese ride because the underside of the thing has the word Japan stamped into it, along with a rather easy to see hexagonal imprint, no doubt from the bolt or the nut that held it on the lathe when the cymbal was made. Now, as you can see, this thing is banged up. It's got lots of ripples around the edge and dents and things like that. There's no key holding and there's no cracking really. It's just kind of dented and banged up. And it has just the most intriguing dark sound. It hums when you're close to it, which isn't attractive, but microphones never, ever hear that. And you get a couple feet away and you don't hear it either. It records really well. It's a really dry, defined ride sound, and it's very crashable too. It's really musical. I've used it for a lot of stuff, mostly rock and pop type stuff, both as a crash and as a ride cymbal, but it also would be great for jazz, though I don't personally have the opportunity very often to play jazz like I did when I was younger. But it would be a really great cymbal for that too. And it's just something magical about it that is just so intriguing to me. I love the fact that it's brass and has been beat to death and that it sounds amazing. And I've actually got one friend who has tried on many occasions to buy it from me, and I'm not willing to part with it. So love this cymbal. Check it out. Next, I've got this 18-ish inch Zildjian cymbal. I don't know what to call it. I use it as a crash. I'm not sure what it was when it was made because it is really big, but it's unusually thin and very easy to bend. Although in spite of its ease of being bent, it doesn't stay that way, fortunately. So I guess we could call it elastic. If you watch my last video, you get that. Okay, so anyway, it is sort of permanently bent, kind of, from the previous user. But I got this thing back in 1992. This is the oldest thing for me on this whole set. I got this back in 1992. I lived in Thousand Oaks, California, worked at Los Robles Regional Medical Center, which is still there, so maybe you live out there and you know what hospital I'm talking about. I worked in the pharmacy there, and there was a fellow named Kenny who I think worked in radiology. He was a tech in there, but he was a drummer, and we kind of got to know each other, and we'd talk drums at lunch and stuff like that. One day he brought his cymbal bag with him, and he was a Paiste guy, and I was at the time a Zildjian guy. I'm kind of a nothing or really an everything guy now, but at the time I was a Zildjian guy. So we would talk things like cast versus non-cast cymbals and things like that. But he brought his cymbals one day, and so during lunch we went out and I was, taking them out of his bag one at a time and hitting them, and we kind of got all the way through rides, crash, hi-hats, everything pretty much. Then I pulled this thing out of his bag. It's not a Paiste and it's not recent, and all his cymbals were pretty recent. So I put it on my finger, and I was like, "That's awesome!" And he goes, "You like that?" And I was like, "Yeah, I love it." And he goes, "It's yours." I was like, "Okay, hold on, don't say that, I'll take it. Do not say that." And he was like, "No, seriously, you can have it." So I took it, and I have used it almost constantly ever since. This is a really cool cymbal. I call it a crash. Again, I'm not sure what Zildjian called it back in the day because it's really, really thin, but it's really big, and I call it 18-ish because it's really a little plus or minus depending upon which way you measure it. It actually has been cut down by somebody who did a decent job because it doesn't have sharp edges. But if you look at the lathing, you got grooves that go off the edge and back on, and there's little areas of this thing that are sort of, there's like a little lope here, like it's sort of oval, kind of. So I don't think it left the factory that way, but it is a Zildjian. It has the Zildjian logo on it that's been stamped into it, and I have since learned that it is called a trans stamp Zildjian, which is not terribly easy to see, but it is definitely there. And because of the type of stamp that it is, would put its manufacture date between mid-40s to like early 50s. And so I don't know what models they were making and what they were calling them back then, if they were calling them thin and heavy and whatever. Ultimately, Zildjian developed the names Crash and Ride and Splash and Hi-Hat and all that kind of stuff. But I don't know what this was other than just a really freaking large, super thin cymbal. Nothing like it that I can find in the catalog today from any manufacturer. But this cymbal I used always as a crash over here on this kit because it's my free kit I'm putting it over here like as my main crash. But normally, with my normal setup, it's over as an auxiliary crash. And then in big bridge sections where you might be like riding the crash and just this constant wash of sound, it is beautiful for that. It's an amazing sound. It's dark, it's rich, it's got an almost China-like overtone quality to it, but real musical, which is weird because it's a fairly high-profile cymbal to have such a dark tone. But microphones love this cymbal. It records really, really well. Nice, mellow, smooth, and rich. Check it out. The last thing on this kit, and it's the most recent acquisition, as a matter of fact, are these hi-hats. They are Meinl Profile Hi-Hats, and you can kind of see the Profile name and the Meinl logo here. And actually, underneath this word Profile was actually the model that was written, and I believe the model of these would be called Hi-Tech hi-hats. Basically, there were 3 lines in the Profile line, I guess, 3 sort of models or sublines or whatever you want to call them. It was Volcanic Rock, where they're heavy cymbals, Velvet Rock, where they're medium weight cymbals, and then Hi-Tech, which were their lighter weight cymbals. And they were all B8 bronze, and I think they were made in Germany. But I remember these came out, and I'm sorry, but the colorful, the red and green logo, and the fact that I was a big Zildjian guy back in the day, and in the 80s, I just was totally uninterested. I actually remember seeing ads for these in Modern Drummer magazine. But the reason I have these, this was actually just a purchase, and I consider it part of my free kit because I still have, what, $395 to play with here, and so this takes 80 of that, leaves me with 315. All said and done, these drums and cymbals plus $315. So I mean, these are free drums. But I bought these because I was actually in Bradenton, Florida, my mom's hometown, with her brother for his 70th high school reunion last year. And while I was there, I went by a music store, like a pawn shop there, and they had several hi-hats that were set up, cymbals. You could just go in and kind of play them. And I went over and I played not these, but a pair of Profile Volcanic Rock, which was the heavy one. And I was shocked. They were, out of all the hats they had, I mean, they had some Zildjians and some, they had a pretty good selection. It was like a musical store, had a lot of used musical instruments. And they by far sounded the best. And I think they were 89 bucks or something for the pair. And I was shocked. I loved them, totally worth it. Brought those home. The reason those are not included in this kit is because they are heavy. And the rest of these cymbals, really lighter kind of texture. This is a better match. But because I got those, I became very interested to look and see about Profile cymbals, and that's when I learned there were 3 versions. So this, I think, is the lighter version just because they're very lightweight. I got them online, but the listing, they were lightweight. So I'm thinking that they are the Hi-Tech cymbals. But they are lightweight. They're like Paiste 2002-ish, which I've always kind of dug this sort of Euro bronze vibe for hi-hats. Ever since I was in high school and Zildjian came out with their Amir line, not the Amir 2, but the original Amir line, which was a B8 bronze cymbal that was really well machined, and they were actually really nice sounding cymbals, and a buddy of mine bought a pair of hi-hats, and I loved them. And then they burned up in a fire, and I'll tell you about that in a future video because he had a snare drum of mine that burned up in that fire, but I actually have it down here because I rebuilt it. Keep watching, I'm going to talk about that in another video. But anyway, I've always liked that vibe for the hi-hat cymbals, and this is kind of that vibe. And so these were 80 bucks shipped, Killer deal, great sounding, really cool, crisp hi-hats. Check them out.